Hello and welcome to Red Pill Rundown. In my last video I made a brief reference to the Starship Troopers franchise, and someone commented asking for a quick rundown video on the book. Well, I've actually had a copy for a while now and had thought of doing a video on it in the past, so I went ahead and reread it. Would you like to know more? No worries, because here's a quick rundown on Starship Troopers. Disclaimer that this video is not a chapter-by-chapter summary of the book, but rather a summary of its world, views, and themes. We start, and will continue, with the book from the perspective of the main character, Johnny Rico, a member of the Terran Federation's mobile infantry, similar in a sense to the US Army's airborne infantry or rangers, more similar to the ODST troops in the Halo series, as they are launched from orbital ships by drop pods into combat on planets where they fight using mechanized suits or power armor, with an assortment of weapons including flamethrowers and small-scale atomic rockets. The Terran Federation, being Earth and its colony planets, is engaged in an interstellar war against aliens called bugs. It should be noted that while the Terran Federation is a global government, unique cultures to places and peoples from the French to the Japanese still remain. One difference from the get-go compared to most, if not all, modern militaries is that the infantry have secondary roles like cook and chaplain. That is to say, if someone is in the mobile infantry, everyone in good health goes into combat. As Johnny says, everybody drops and everybody fights. It's the same in their boot camp, as the chaplain and band members are all boots. While either gender can be in any role, it is noted that the ships typically have female pilots, as they have faster reactions and can tolerate more G-forces than men, allowing them to get in and out of situations faster. Focusing on one of the major aspects of the book's world, anyone at the age of 18 can volunteer for federal service, and no one can legally stop them as it is a constitutional right. Service is at minimum a term of 2 years, but can be longer if needed, and can also be a career. Finishing one's term of service guarantees citizenship, which entails the franchise and the ability to hold public office. Such rights, once earned, can only be stripped off a citizen by means of the ruling of a court composed of their sovereign peers. A soldier accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the body politic of which he is a member, defending it, if need be, with his life. The civilian does not. Those who do not serve are civilians, which have some rights as a result of, at the least, being taxpayers, such as free speech, but are unable to vote or hold public office. Civilians can run businesses and other ventures from insurance broker to chemist, and can flourish to the point of affording house staff and vacations off of Terra to the Moon and even Mars, as is the case for Johnny's family, his father being a wealthy businessman. Apart from the two benefits previously mentioned, the government of the Terran Federation does not incentivize federal service in any way. As they have to accept anyone who wants to join up, recruiters try, in fact, to often dissuade people from doing so. If someone does join, they will be placed in a position that tests their abilities, whatever those abilities are, so that everyone's term of service is difficult, even in peacetime, to both motivate people to give up, and so that if they fulfill their obligations, the resulting citizenship is considered to be earned. As a recruiter states to Johnny, "So for those who insist on serving their term, but haven't got what we want and must have, we've had to think up a whole list of dirty, nasty, dangerous jobs that will either run them home with their tails between their legs and their terms uncompleted, or at the very least make them remember for the rest of their lives that their citizenship is valuable to them because they've paid a high price for it." To add additional clarity, while undergoing his physical at the recruitment office, Johnny asks the doctor how many people fail the physical. The doctor, a civilian employee, states nobody fails as the doctors can't legally do so. The only way you can fail is by having the psychiatrists decide that you are not able to understand the oath. Like the recruiter, the doctor also tries to dissuade people from joining. Upon taking the oath and finishing the initial enlistment process, recruits have 48 hours of leave. If a recruit doesn't return, there are no punishments and no court-martial. They are simply recorded as having failed their service and can never try to become a citizen again. Recruits can state a preference for service like pilot or R&D, and if they show they have the right stuff, they can get that job. If not, a job will be chosen for them. Johnny doesn't meet the requirements for his top choices and ends up getting his last stated choice, mobile infantry. Like with prior stages, boot camp is designed to be as difficult as possible to get rid of weak recruits. Some were discharged, but some were allowed to sweat out their terms in the non-combatant services via manual labor. Mr. Dubois, a veteran of the mobile infantry and high school teacher of history and moral philosophy, teaches Johnny and informs us, the reader, of ideas and themes central to Starship Troopers. Violence, naked force, has settled more issues in history than has any other factor, and the contrary opinion is wishful thinking at its worst. Breeds that forget this basic truth have always paid for it with their lives and freedoms. He goes on to speak of value, in that the Marxist's definition of basing value on objects from the effort put into them is false. He uses cooking as an example, in that a bad chef can take good ingredients, already having some value, and fail at cooking, resulting in something of no value at all. Likewise, a great chef can take those same ingredients and make something more valuable than the ingredients were in their original independent state. Instead, value here is being defined as being relative to living beings, and how something can be used and the cost to acquire it. Mr. Dubois speaks against the classic phrase, "the best things in life are free." This was the tragic fallacy which brought on the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they could simply vote for whatever they wanted, and get it without toil, without sweat, without tears. Nothing of value is free. Even the breath of life is purchased at birth only through gasping effort and pain. He explains by writing an award for first place in the 100-meter dash, and gives it to Johnny, asking if he values it. Johnny states he got 4th place, and throws the award away. Mr. Dubois uses this as an example that some things are valued because they are earned rather than freely given. The best things in life are beyond money, their price is agony and sweat and devotion. In a later chapter, a discussion of crime and punishment takes place. In the Terran Federation, the death penalty and other physical punishments like flogging are used. Johnny thinks back to another high school session where Mr. Dubois talks about how before the Federation, crime was high in places like North America where people couldn't even safely visit a public park at night. He discusses with then-student Johnny on how a dog learns from being scolded, having their nose rubbed in it, and spanked in a timely fashion. However, before the Federation, youths were scolded, but not much else. Were their noses rubbed in it? Rarely. News organs and officials usually kept their names secret. In many places, the law so required for criminals under 18. Were they spanked? Indeed not, as physical punishment was seen as cruel and unusual. As a result, criminal youths could simply be scolded, put in a comfortable cell for periods of time, with other criminals that could teach more criminal methods and behavior, and then more strictly punished as an adult later in life. Mr. Dubois compares this to raising a puppy by never spanking it, just putting it in a doghouse with food and water for a time as punishment whenever the pup did something wrong, and then putting it down when this dog became an adult, stated in the book, of course, to be a very crazy way to raise a dog. While a judge should be benevolent in purpose, his awards should cause the criminal to suffer, else there is no punishment, and pain is the basic mechanism built into us by millions of years of evolution which safeguards us by warning when something threatens our survival. As for unusual, punishment must be unusual or it serves no purpose. Such punishment is so unusual as to be significant, to deter, to instruct. Mr. Dubois states that the fundamental mistake of the past system was assuming that man was instinctively moral. Man has no moral instinct. He is not born with a moral sense. You were not born with it, I was not, and a puppy has none. We acquire a moral sense, when we do, through training, experience, and hard sweat of the mind. What is the moral sense? It is an elaboration of the instinct to survive. Mr. Dubois expands on this by speaking on how the instinct to survive can be cultivated into more subtle and complex motivations, learning that survival can have stronger imperatives than one's individual survival, such as one's family, nation, and so on. The basis of all morality is duty, a concept with the same relation to group that self-interest has to survival. Mr. Dubois states that children become adults when they understand a duty and embrace it more than their self-love. The discussion ends with a critique of the concept of man's natural rights. What right to life has a man who is drowning in the Pacific? The ocean will not hearken to his cries. What right to life has a man who must die if he is to save his children? If he chooses to save his own life, does he do so as a matter of right? If two men are starving and cannibalism is the only alternative to death, which man's right is unalienable? As to liberty, the heroes who signed the great document pledged themselves to buy liberty with their lives. Liberty is never unalienable, it must be redeemed regularly with the blood of patriots or it always vanishes. Of all the so-called natural human rights that have ever been invented, liberty is the least likely to be cheap and is never free of cost. The third right? The pursuit of happiness? It is indeed unalienable, but it is not a right. It is simply a universal condition which tyrants cannot take away nor patriots restore. Cast me into a dungeon, burn me at the stake, crown me king of kings. I can pursue happiness as long as my brain lives, but neither gods nor saints, wise men nor subtle drugs, can ensure that I will catch it. And that was the soft spot which destroyed which was in many ways an admirable culture. The junior hoodlums who roamed their streets were symptoms of a greater sickness. Their citizens glorified their mythology of rights and lost track of their duties. No nation so constituted can endure. Johnny does well in the mobile infantry and decides to stay in the military as a career and even going to school to get commissioned as an officer. Only combat vets can go to OCS. There, he is again placed in a class of history and moral philosophy. His new teacher, a blind veteran named Major Ride, discusses why their system of franchise works better than previous forms of government. Throughout history, men have labored to place the sovereign franchise in hands that would guard it well and use it wisely for the benefit of all. All systems seek to achieve this by limiting franchise to those who are believed to have the wisdom to use it justly. I repeat, all systems. Even the so-called unlimited democracies excluded people from franchise not less than 1/4 of their population by age, birth, poll tax, criminal record, or other. The sovereign franchise has been bestowed by all sorts of rules: places of birth, family of birth, race, sex, property, education, age, religion, etc. All these systems worked and none of them well. All were regarded as tyrannical by many, all eventually collapsed or were overthrown. Now here we are with still another system, and our system works quite well. Many complain, but none rebel. Personal freedom for all is greatest in history, laws are few, taxes are low, living standards are as high as productivity permits, crime is at its lowest ebb. Why? Under our system, every voter and office holder is a man who has demonstrated through voluntary and difficult service that he places the welfare of the group ahead of personal advantage. Authority and responsibility must be equal. The Major also makes a brief note on the errors of limiting population growth and general expansion. Without debating the usefulness or morality of Planned Parenthood, it may be verified by observation that any breed which stops its own increase gets crowded out by breeds which expand. Some human populations did so in Terran history, and other breeds moved in and engulfed them. As for the rest of the book, we see Johnny go from a recruit in boot camp, to sergeant, to OCS, and finally to officer, all while the bug war rages on. That's your quick rundown. Links in the description. See you guys later.